Good afternoon, everybody. I would like to thank the invitation to participate in this virtual conference of chemistry and its application, sponsored by UPAC and the Commonwealth Chemistry, and organized by the University of Mauritius. The presentation today will be speciation of chromium, manganese, and manganese in the breathable fraction of urban dust collected in the Tampico conurbation using micro X-ray fluorescence and micro X-ray absorption near-edge spectroscopy. My name is Felipe Caballero Briones. I am from Instituto Politecnico Nacional in Mexico, working in CICATA Altamira Center and pertaining group leader of materials and technologies for energy, health, and environment. I would like to thank all the institutions that worked in this contribution. University of Tecnológica de Altamira, Instituto Tecnológico de Madero, Universidad Autónoma de Tamaulipas, Universidad de Veracruz, Brookhaven National Laboratory, the Center of Advanced Radiation Sources of the University of Chicago, the Center of Research in Environmental Geography, the Science and Technology Ministry in Mexico, and of course, Instituto Politecnico Nacional. I will also thank the financement by Instituto Politecnico Nacional, the National Laboratory of Nanotechnology and Biomaterials, and the financement by the Brookhaven National Laboratory through this proposal. This is a panoramic image of our center, CICATA Altamira, that is located in the northeast part of Mexico by the Gulf of Mexico coast, as well as the Brookhaven National Laboratory, the national synchrotron source, located in the middle of Long Island, state of New York, where part of this work was done. I would like to thank the contributors of this work, myself, Dr. Roberto Colina, Dr. Ryan Tapero, Dr. Sandra Benito, Dr. Francisco Bautista, Dr. Erika Larcón, Dr. Francisco Espinosa, and Master Mireya Obando. I will begin with this phrase, we are dust from other mods. This is an old Spanish saying that relates that the problems we have now come from the wrong decisions we take in the past. So saying this, the urban dust will be studied here. We will talk about the origin, the components, how it disperses, how the exposition and the risks are coming. The urban dust comes from a lot of different origins, from mostly anthropogenic activities, industry, traffic, construction, energy production, and so on, that release a lot of tiny particles that constitute the dust. Many of these particles can be suspended in the form of suspended material of small size, have 10 micrometers and 2.5 micrometers that are the breathable section of the urban dust. And they have a lot of different pollutants such as gases, organic volatile compounds. There is a lot of concern on the toxicity of urban dust. In Mexico City, there was a recent work studying the concentration of toxic metals such as zinc, copper, chromium, or manganese in the main roads in Mexico City. As you can see here, the maps indicate the relative concentration of lead, for example, in the main cities. And there was another very interesting study that concluded that Morelia and Mexico City in Mexico are two of the most toxic urban dust found in the world, above London and above New York. That is quite surprising. Urban dust contains, as we see in the previous study, a lot of heavy metals such as lead, arsenide, manganese, antimonium, etc. And also there is an interesting conclusion of this work that shows that the more concentrated metals are inside the houses. So there is a proposal of avoid exposure to the urban dust by cleaning, by closing the windows, avoiding dust coming inside the houses. Urban dust, as we mentioned, contains a lot of organic fraction. It contains combustion residuals, including sulfur and carbon nanoparticles, carbon black, soot, organic volatile compounds that are released from the pavement, from the tires, and from different industrial activities that can be deeply inhalated and cause problems in all the respiratory tract. Also, there is a lot of organic matter, biological matter that includes microorganisms, spores, fragments of insects, pollen that are prone to cause allergies, asthma. Also, due to the building activities, the mineral transport activities, demolition, pavement erosion, there are several minerals, oxides, sulfides, sample zeolites that can contain toxic minerals such as asbestos, for example, or noxious irritant that also can transport heavy metals through the city. There are three main exposition routes to toxic metals, to heavy metals, and also other contaminants such as microplastics that are the inhalation of small particles, usually below 10 nanometers, the micrometers, I'm sorry, ingestion that is taken by the mouth, and skin exposition, thermal absorption, that are contact to the dust, and they can cause several irritation, several effects that come from local irritation to even cancer, affecting target organs such as the respiratory tract, the gastrointestinal tract, and the skin, between other, causing also problems with circulation, cardiovascular problems, and so on. And a problem that is not commonly addressed is the dragging of pollutants with rains. Rain usually cleans the atmosphere of smoke, but all these particles are drawn to the water bodies, to the sewage, and so on, and can affect, if they are not properly treated, or in the case of close water bodies, increase the pollution of these bodies, and at the end come back to the humans and the ecosystems. We will talk about the presence of heavy metals in the Tampico conurbation, where I live. We want to discuss some of the emission sources, how we collect the dust, and how we did spatial temporal studies, and which are the health risks that can appear. This is very crowded slide trying to show how many are the pollutant sources in the Tampico conurbation. In the north part of the conurbation, we have oil extraction activities. There is active wells. There are spills around the wells. We have an industrial harbor that with petrochemical transportation, mineral transportation, cars, fuel transportation. Around the center of the city, of the conurbation, we have a large industry of petrochemical, plastics, resins, and so on. The airport, international airport, is also located in a very densely populated part. Aviation can produce soot, can produce carbon black, organic volatile compounds. Through the river, or by the river side, there is so we have maritime maintenance and construction of ships, and also construction of oil drilling platforms, maintenance and construction of oil drilling platforms that are moved through the river up to the sea, where they are transported to the offshore extraction fields. And also we have the refinery, where there are transport of oil from the wells, from the ships, and there is a lot of emissions of fumes and different smells. To figure out how is the dust in our city, we set up a collaborative campaign for dust collection. We invited undergraduate students from two local universities here, we adapted a method from the literature to collect the powder, to sieve the powder, and geolocalize the powder so we know exactly when and where we took the samples. We collected 36 points during the dry season and 60 points during the rainy seasons. We sieved the powder, dried the powder, and kept it in polyethylene bags. You have here this map with these pies, bigger and smaller pies that indicate the relative amount of pollution in each of these 60 sites. No, we are coming to this map later. But also we select some points, 7 points, where we did X-ray diffraction of the powder to identify the main minerals that are present in this region. We have mostly quartz that came from the sand. There is the Gulf of Mexico here, and calcite also. And there are several minerals that have different chemical compositions. After X-ray fluorescence, we perform a space analysis of nickel and chromium concentration. The red color is when the red color is more intense, there is a higher relative contents of nickel that, as you can see here, is very concentrated in the region where it is the refinery. Nickel is one of the metals associated with oil. It's a marker together with vanadium of the type of oils that are refined and burned. And there are some nickel concentration near to the coast of the lakes here, and some points here. And in the case of chromium, the hotspots are mainly concentrated in the industrial corridor and around the river, and interestingly, near the city center where there is a commercial port. As we mentioned, we came back to this map. We calculated this magnitude, that is a cumulative health index for children. This cumulative index comes from the summatory of the hazards of exposition from ingestion, inhalation, and dermal exposition, from the three routes of exposition for all toxic metals we detected: iron, chromium, vanadium, nickel, manganese, lead, and zinc. As you can see, there is a very high cumulative health index here in the industrial region. And by the river and by the refinery, there are also very high cumulative health index. And also here, we will take this point as interesting because it's in the middle of the commercial zone, as I mentioned before. Also, we have 20 points with both collected in the dry season and in the rainy season, where we compare the amount of these metals: bromium, yttrium, chromium, strontium, lead, zinc, nickel, manganese, and vanadium, that, as you can see, vary very much, have a very different relative concentrations between the dry season and the rainy season. As you can see, the amounts of strontium and yttrium increase a lot after the rain, so it indicates that these pollutants were suspended in the air during the dry season. And also important contents of chromium in both seasons are observed, manganese also, and vanadium. So these variations come from the points where these powders were collected. As you can see, these polygons indicate where the water internal basins of water circulation inside the conurbation are set. This is like a pond where all the water comes from this part when it rains, and this is an elevated zone of the city. There are some hills where the water flows through the coast or through the lagunary bodies. So the concentrations vary because the dragged pollutants settle in these basins. This is supported by the air quality in the dry and the rainy seasons. In the dry seasons, you can see here the air quality was very bad. The concentrations were about 40 milligrams per cubic meter of the suspended pollutants, 2.5 microns. But after the rain, the medium concentration of 2.5 pollutants reduced a lot because all these pollutants, suspended pollutants, were dragged to the sea, which explains the changes in the chemical concentration of the elements of these seasons. Um, so after this previous study, we are going to present the chromium and manganese speciation in the four beam line in the National Synchrotron Lake source in the Briones National Laboratory. First, we have to discuss a bit about how bioavailable are the different elements depending on its chemical form. Each compound has a different water solubility. For example, in the case of nickel, nickel sulfate is very has a high solubility in water, and the respiratory toxicity is also very high because all the mucoses have water, and then so nickel can get into the body. In the case of nickel disulfide, it's practically insoluble in water, and the respiratory toxicity is intermediate. However, in the case of nickel sulfate, that is quite soluble, the toxicity, the cellular uptake is deniable. So the particles inside the nucleus of the cells that are prone to have changes that conduce to cancer are known, and there is not enough concentration of nickel using nickel sulfate to produce tumor induction. On contrary, nickel sulfide, when it's taken by ingestion, for example, is very easily endositized. It's very accumulated in the nucleus, so it has a lot of possibility to induce tumor, for example. So it's important to understand it's not only the presence of the metal is important to consider, but also the speciation. Some of the most toxic elements as vanadium, chromium, manganese, nickel, for example, have several oxidation states and depend also in the media they are. If they are in particulate matter, they can be accumulated in different solids, in organic, in biological tissues. In the case of soluble dissolved in water, they can be in different forms, both organic and inorganic. And considering, for example, chromium, it's interesting to see that chromium 3 or chromite is the less toxic form of chromium, while chromium trioxide has 15,000 milligrams per kilogram, very high compared with chromite. So the corollary of this discussion is to understand not only the metals, but the species of the metals have to be considered to assess the potential health effects. In this study, in the previous part of the study, we used X-ray fluorescence using a benchtop equipment that has a large beam size. It analyzes spots of 1.2 millimeters, 3 millimeters, and 7 millimeters with a fixed excitation source, 15 kilovolts or 50 kilovolts only. And in the case of synchrotron-based X-ray fluorescence at the 4BM XFM beam line in Brookhaven, there is an energy range from 2.1 to 21 kilo electron volts. But we have a spot size of 5 microns, so there is a lot of spatial resolution here. And also there is a very large flux of photons that reach samples, so the limit of detection is very low. We can see parts per million of the pollutant. That is not very possible with benchtop materials with high resolution. Coming back to our selected points, we collect the sample here in the rainy seasons. We mentioned that this is in the middle of the industrial corridor. There is a road here with a very heavy traffic. There is a lot of trucks, a lot of trailers, a lot of urban transport. So there is a lot of traffic, and there are industries all around. And in the case of this second spot, obtained during the dry season, it's in the middle of the commercial zone. There are three big malls around. There is a lot of urban traffic. There are schools also around there. and it is also in a flat zone that is close to water basins. Okay, so we took these two samples and the other samples indicated in the previous map. And here we can observe how the samples were prepared for be measured in the synchrotron in Brookhaven. These thin layers are petrographic sections of the powders. They were fixed in resin and grinded up to down to 30 microns. So the sections are very thin, and the powder is very sparse. So we can do maps in different sections of these thin layers and observe individual particles that can be individually analyzed chemically and structurally. Also, we have some of the seabed powders we brought to the synchrotron and disperse the powder on the top of a Kapton tape, so they can be analyzed without being grinded as the petrographic sections were. And this is the mounting of the samples in this rack that will be illuminated by the beam that comes from here. This is the X-ray detector, and there is a camera, a microscope camera here, which takes that selects the regions where we are going to study the particles. This is the workflow in the synchrotron. So first of all, we select an area with a microscope. We observe where we are going to study. The size of the region can be some millimeters wide, some like 10 millimeters wide, something like that. So it's relatively large. And then we perform a map, a general map of X-ray fluorescence there to observe the composition, the general composition of that map. Then we identify particles of interest. So we see this, making the map, we can observe, for example, chromium or manganese and see which particles contain one of them or both of them, select them, and then study with the tail. We do the mapping of vanadium, chromium, and manganese. And when we identify the particles we want to study, we select 5-micron spots at each particle. So we select at least 3 spots where we will perform X-ray fluorescence to confirm that this spot contains chromium and manganese or chromium or manganese, and then do micro X-ray absorption near-edge spectroscopy in these very spots in the vanadium, chromium, or manganese KHs. And then with this spectra, we will perform the speciation to see which is the oxidation state, which chemical species are present at each spot, and then compare from the different samples, either the rainy season or the dry season. So these are the maps of the samples, the microscopic maps. So we can see here the pebbles are around this all the sample here and the rainy one. The general X-ray fluorescence maps, where we can observe calcium, titanium, vanadium, manganese, and chromium, and the excitation peak at 7 kiloelectron volts that is able to excite the previous elements. So we can perform a quantitative analysis considering the relative sizes of the peaks. And then we do the compositional map of one selected region. Particularly here, we are mapping calcium, sulfur, and silicon that are among the most mineral contents. Remember the X-ray diffraction, we saw quartz, we saw calcite, we saw gypsum that contain these 3 elements. So you can see here the different pebbles that are, and the color that is associated with calcium in red, sulfur in green, or silicon in blue. And so we select here these particular particles to be analyzed for chromium and manganese. In the case of this other sample, we perform the same mapping of calcium, silicon, and sulfur. And particularly here, we are showing the chromium, vanadium, and manganese mapping. You see, this is a very rich chromium particle. This is the 7 one is mixed between manganese and vanadium, and so on. For example, the 9 is very rich in manganese. So now we identified the particles, and then we go to the particles and perform X-ray absorption near-edge spectroscopy at selected spots, as we can see here. In this map, you can see the manganese-rich particles, this green one, and you see this rhomboedra. You can see here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rhomboedra where we performed X-ray absorption near-edge spectroscopy at the manganese KH. You can observe most of the spectra have this shape, indicating one type of manganese species, and this other one, this is the manganese foil that serves as standard. In the case of this red particle, we also perform four different X-ray absorption near-edge spectra. You can see here that this particular shape, where this is a pre-edge, and in the case this blue one is a chromium foil used as a standard. In the case of the rainy season particle, also for the chromium edge, we perform these spots. We get spectra, and for manganese, you can see from here that there are differences between manganese in the rainy and the dry season, and chromium in the rainy and the dry season. So we have different species, but to have more statistics, we select several particles in each of the samples. We map different regions of the sample to have more statistics and be able to do more conclusions. So in the case of chromium, you see we perform a lot of spectra. At least 20 spectra were performed in different parts of the sample, of the dry season sample. You can see that all the spectra are practically the same, have the same shape, which indicates that all the chromium is in the same, almost the same chemical form. Comparing with the literature, we can state that this form is mostly chromium 3. There is an insinuation here of a very small pre-edge that could be associated with chromium 6, but in the case of the samples collected in the rainy season, this edge is very, very well observed. The shape is different, a bit different than in the case of the dry season samples, and this edge definitely indicates that all the chromium measured here contains chromium 6. We have a very nice finding, a very interesting finding, that are these spectra obtained all through the rainy season sample show this particular shape that is associated with barium chromate. Barium chromate is a substance that is used in anti-corrosive coatings, and we can remember that anti-corrosive coatings are used in ships, are used in oil drilling platforms, are using in conduction pipes for petrochemical derivatives. So it is very it's possible that some of these particles that were measured and identified as chromate come from the erosion, the leaching of these particles from coated structures. In the case of manganese, the pink trace shown here in the middle of the other traces is that observed in the dry seasons. All the manganese in the dry seasons behave the same, but as you can observe, there are several forms of manganese. This horizontal line indicates the absorption edge of manganese, the KH of manganese, and as more left side is the edge, more reduced is the manganese, and as more rightwards is the edge, more oxidized is manganese. So we can see here that we have a lot of different species of manganese during the rainy season. That is very important because oxidation and I mean, redox reactions can occur in the presence of moisture, and can be associated, for example, to chromium oxidation and manganese reduction. As you can observe here, the manganese KH has at least 8 different shapes. depending on which particle we measure. So in the same sample, in the rain samples, we observe all this variety of manganese oxidation states. Some of these states are more toxic than others, as we discussed it before. But in the case of the dry season, all the manganese is the same. So the moisture during the rainy season, the moisture in the powder changes the oxidation state, also interacting with the rest of the metals in the sample, particularly chromium. So to conclude this presentation, we analyzed some urban dust powder samples collected in the rain season and in the dry season in the Tampico conurbation. As we mentioned, it's a conurbation with about 1 million inhabitants, with a lot of industry. We observed some particles where barium chromate was suspected that will come from anti-corrosive coatings in industrial environments. Other samples during the rainy season present pH peaks associated with chromium-6, while samples collected in the dry season do not present almost any evidence of chromium-6, which coupled with the variety of oxidation states we observed in manganese indicates a large interaction between the moisture and the metals present in the dust. So it is very concerning the presence of these toxic metals in dust around 5 micron scale, because it is in the order of the breathable and ingestible part of the urban dust, which poses worries about the effects of human health, particularly in children. As we see, Tampico has a large pollution index of the different metals, including chromium and manganese. And this work poses the importance of doing a more extensive work, monitoring the states of chromium and manganese and other metals, including monitoring the water bodies, the sediments, biological tissues of different species, and disseminate the data among the public and among the stakeholders to reduce, mitigate, and remedy potential impacts on the health of the socio-ecosystems. These are some images of our work in the Brookhaven National Laboratory held 1 month ago. This is my group in CICATA, the group of materials and technologies for energy health and environment. The group is composed by my postdoctoral fellows, my PhD students, my master students, and a BAC student from Instituto Tecnológico de Madero. This is our YouTube channel where you can find many activities we do, seminars, events we organize, demonstrative experiments, and so on. And as conclusion, this work shows that we are stardust reflecting on the stars, a phrase of our dear Carl Sagan. And this is an image recently taken of microplastics observed inside the powders, in the powders we collected. So this is a work we would like to continue studying these emerging pollutants. And thank you very much for your attention, and thank you for the organizers.